Well, I preached on this same Sunday 3 years ago, which I think was just after Tiff had left, which is probably why I was preaching. And I started my sermon with these words. Once upon a time, a rabbi and a soap maker went for a walk together. And the soap maker asked, "What good is religion? Look at all the trouble and misery of the world. After thousands of years of teaching about goodness, truth, and peace, after all the prayers and sermons, if religion is so good for people, why should this be? Why indeed should this be? If there is indeed a God, why is the world in such a mess?" Well, a lot has happened over 3 years. Good things, but also a lot of very troubling things have happened and are still going on. So things just don't look like getting much better in the near future. Our gospel this morning announces that Jesus has set his face for Jerusalem. Now, as Michael Marsh says, we all have a Jerusalem. Most of us are not content just to drift through life, and most of us do in fact have some sort of plan for our lives that defines the direction in which we are heading. But what is that plan, and what is that direction? What are the general guidelines that we use in our decision making? What are our aims in life, and how do they fit in with the gospel teachings? Well, there is no doubt that today's gospel is a challenging one. It shines a light on the conflicts that we experience in life and the ways in which our opinions and loyalties are so often torn and pulled in so many different directions. When the Samaritans rejected Jesus, the disciples were understandably unhappy and wanted to call down fire and brimstone upon them. They wanted to retaliate. But that was not Jesus' way. As we all know, his way was one of healing and wholeness, mercy and forgiveness, peace, reconciliation with God and with each other. So Jesus takes the opportunity to speak about the real meaning of discipleship and the real implications of following him. Now, as he often does, he speaks in hyperboles and exaggerations to emphasize the point he's trying to make. But in essence, he's saying to them, look, you've got to be willing to let go of the past. Things won't be the same. You bury the dead and move on. There comes a time when you leave the comforts of your home, let go of the doorpost, and move into uncharted waters. In each of the 3 conversations that we hear in this passage, this idea about letting go or giving up something is spelled out. If a disciple intentionally sets their face to Jerusalem, then they have to recognize that they are putting themselves on a path of change and transformation. Now, Jesus wasn't saying that we shouldn't attend funerals or conduct funerals. Rather, he was emphasizing the fact that Jerusalem is more about life. And if we are overly concerned with and attached to the past, then yes, we will find problems. Setting our face to Jerusalem means a reordering of our priorities. It is an all or nothing proposition. We may have to learn as we go, but we are either on the road to Jerusalem or we are not. So I guess the question that faces us all is, what will that look like in our lives today? Right now, are we on the right road? Are we following in the footsteps of Jesus? What values, opinions, ideas do we hold that are no longer valuable and block our way? What are the hard questions that we need to have a good, honest look at? What have we learned over all that's happened over the last couple of years? What impact have things like the pandemic, the floods, the lack of housing, and the difficulties that so many people are facing now? What impact has all that had on us? Have they changed us? I quoted Michael Marshall at the beginning. For years now, I have gone to his website, Interrupting the Silence, for inspiration and ideas when preparing sermons. Michael Marsh is an Episcopalian priest who has served for many, many years as rector of St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Uvalde. Now, of course, a few weeks ago, you probably wouldn't have known where Uvalde was, and nor would I. Sadly, that has now changed in such a heart-rending way with a senseless killing of 19 children and 2 adults. Just imagine what that community is going through, and how, as a priest, you might comfort and try to answer all the questions that must surely arise. I just find that thought overwhelming. Michael Marsh says that so many people contacted him asking, "What can I do?" Well, I want to share with you this morning some of his responses that he has given to his congregation, because I think they might help us on our journey. He said, "I think there may be a better question, albeit a more difficult one, for us to be asking. And that is, what more can we do?" That more is at the heart of Jesus' gospel. He was always living into, demonstrating, and calling us into the more. When Jesus preached the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and so on. He was preaching about the more. All those times when he said, "You have heard that it was said, but I say to you," he was choosing the more over the less. When Jesus said to the woman caught in adultery, "Neither do I condemn you," he was offering her the more. The more that I'm speaking about, he said, is not about a quantity, it's about a way of life, our values and our priorities. It's about who and how we want to be, and not just about what we do. He went on, and remember this one was particularly written just a few days after what happened. He said, "Everything has been called into question by what happened last Tuesday, and I can no longer look at my life in the same way. If today I am holding the same positions, keeping the same stances, maintaining the same priorities as I did Monday night when I went to bed, if I am not examining my life and values, if I am not reconsidering my priorities, if I am not considering new questions or points of view about poverty, mental health care, racism, gun violence, then I am not seeking or working out of the more." If we get through what has happened to Uvalde and nothing changes, then we are settling for the less. I don't want us to live in the less. I want us to choose to live in and become the more. I don't want us to just believe in Jesus. I want us to follow Jesus into the more for the sake of those who died, for the sake of our children and grandchildren, for the sake of Uvalde. over the last few years here in Australia and in the wider world, many people have really suffered and are still suffering because of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the floods and all the flow-on effects. How does all of that, including what happened in Uvalde, change the way that we think or act? Back to Michael Marsh. A week or so ago, he added these words: I don't want us to be defined or possessed by the unbearable darkness. I want us to allow it to soften our hearts, open our ears, and sharpen our vision to the Spirit that guides us into all truth. Pray and dream with your eyes wide open. What do you see? What do you feel? Where does it hurt in you, in others, Uvalde, our country? Let your grief give way to compassion, and your anger give rise to change. What are your prayers and dreams for making all things new? And what is your role in them? I think some very wise words and some very good advice in all of that for the people of Uvalde, but also for us. So back to the rabbi and the soap maker who asked, what good is religion? Look at all the trouble and misery of the world. If religion is so good for people, why should this be? Well, the rabbi said nothing. They continued walking until he noticed a child playing in the gutter. Then the rabbi said, look at that child. You say that soap makes people clean, but see the dirt on that youngster? Of what good is soap? With all the soap in the world, that child is still filthy. I wonder how effective soap is after all. The soap maker protested and said, but Rabbi, soap can't do any good unless it's used. Exactly, replied the rabbi. So it is with religion. If we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit. Amen.